our buddy Larry Krueger, who is at camp again today, joins us now on Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Larry, thanks for doing it. What do you think about that? To what level do you think that a Trey Lance trade is on the table this camp?
Well, I've talked so much about it going into the draft that I almost don't want to talk about that angle on it. But I think it's viable. I think it's reasonable. I think that Brock Purdy's the number one guy, and that Brandon Allen is probably the number 3 guy or an insurance. I think I agree with what Dibs was saying before. I think Brandon Allen's either an insurance policy as the number 3 guy, or he'll be on some other roster. Purdy's the number 1, and Darnold and Lance will compete to be number 2, and whoever doesn't win that is probably moving on. But I also talked to Mike Silver about the conversation he had with Kyle Shanahan, and it really sounds like Shanahan's enamored with Darnold. So it's hard to imagine Darnold going anywhere. So what does that mean? That means either Brandon Allen's going somewhere at the end of camp for a nominal return, maybe a 7th, or maybe Trey Lance is going somewhere at the cut down. That's probably the way it shakes out.
And I think if you look at the long-term viability of the position, and you and I have had this conversation about second contracts, you're not giving Brock and Trey both a second contract just because you don't do that in the NFL. If Brock cements himself healthily as QB1, don't you think that at some point you have to trade Trey Lance anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a to me that would probably be a scary thing to do, Dibs, because of what I think Trey's potential is. But how long are you going to wait around on his potential if you feel like you've got the guy in Brock Purdy and you've insulated him with 2 other, veteran backups? You're not going to be able to keep 4 quarterbacks. If you had a roster that was 75 deep and you could keep a 4th quarterback, then, you could go further down the road because your entire quarterback room is costing you $15 million. So that's one way to look at it and say, yeah, you know what, there's no urgency. But then when you look at next year's cap and how much they have allocated, and I think Lombardi kind of hit on this a little bit with you guys, it's hard to envision, how the Niners are going to keep this team intact going into next year, and keep Trey on the roster with an escalating cap number. So these are, the hard cap in the NFL forces you to make decisions you don't want to make.
Larry, let's back up and just ask, what'd you see with Brock Purdy today?
Oh, I mean, it's funny. I've seen many people say, Brock Purdy was bad today. We all know that Brock Purdy is the most accurate quarterback. He throws, of the 49ers 4, he throws with the most touch and timing and the greatest accuracy. He's the guy with the highest completion percentage. What we needed to see today was, did he lose arm strength coming off of the surgery? And it was really painfully or very, very clear, not painfully necessarily, but it was clear that he hasn't lost any arm strength. He went up top to Deebo Samuel. He overthrew him by 10 yards. He went up top to Juwan Jennings. He overthrew him. I mean, he threw a bullet to Brandon Ayuk in the middle of the field, and it was one of the greatest, highest velocity throws I think I've ever seen Brock make. So, and he talked about how he's letting it rip, and how he went to Jacksonville a few weeks ago and got with his guys, and that's where he kind of tested the thing out, and he's letting it rip. And I didn't see, not only did I not see any diminished ball speed, I would beg to differ on that altogether as far as saying I think it's really, he's got greater ball speed than what I saw last year. So to me, that's what I was looking for. I didn't really care about the 3 for 10. I mean, obviously 30% is too low of a completion percentage, but he had a couple drops. He also went downfield. Everybody else kind of checked it down and threw it in the flat. Brock went down the field, almost as if to give everybody who was watching, hey, you're concerned about my arm talent? Here's my arm talent, baby.
I like your use of baby there, Larry Krueger.
Feels great, baby!
The game. A little bit of a Jimmy throwback there. Larry, at what point do we start actually caring about these guys' numbers? Is it even in the preseason, or is it still just the eye test in terms of how you're drawing your conclusions and making your judgments about these quarterbacks?
Well, I mean, you want to see them complete passes. I'm not the guy who believes that practice doesn't mean anything, Dibs. But we're 3 practices away from putting on pads. I mean, they're just shaking off the rust at this point. You just don't want to see anybody. We saw Burrow go down today with a calf strain. You just don't want to see anybody go down. It's just about shaking off the rust, getting a little timing, and honing. Getting it. Feeling good, getting comfortable. 10 days from now, 2 weeks from now, then you want to see a little bit higher completion percentage. You want to see a little bit more sharpness, crispness in the offense and how it operates. Until then, it's really more about traits. And to me, the bet today was an overwhelming positive because, we didn't know what we were going to see from Brock. If you had seen him complete 9 of 10, but his ball was kind of wobbly and he didn't have a lot of strength to it, that would be a far worse day than if he had completed 0 for 10, but he showed arm strength, because the arm strength is the real question with him.
Our buddy Larry Krueger at 49ers camp today joining us, Willard and Dibs, 95.7 The Game. Hey, Larry, can we go back to your conversation with Mike Silver, who wrote about this in the Chronicle yesterday? How would you characterize what it sounds like Kyle Shanahan thinks of Sam Darnold?
Well, you brought this up earlier in the show, Willard, and, you were totally kind of characterized exactly what Silver and I talked about in the media room after practice today, which is he did a little sit down with Shanahan, and Shanahan's comparing Darnold to, a great player, a Hall of Fame player in Steve Young. And, that right there is an eye-opener because of what Steve Young represented, right? He was terrible in Tampa, and he was a Hall of Famer with the 49ers. And it's pretty, judging from that, it sounds like, Kyle Shanahan has the belief that Sam Darnold in this new setting can kind of be redefined and change the whole narrative on his career. And that's more optimistic than I am, for sure. But, Shanahan knows a lot more about quarterbacks and knows a lot more football than I do. That, to me, was an eye-opener. And Mike thought so as well.
How did Trey Lance look today, and how much can Trey Lance do at this juncture to change the minds of Kyle Shanahan and others on the staff who have seen a lot from Trey Lance and probably don't have too much mystery in terms of what they still want to see from him?
You had Shafsky on earlier. It was quite the commute, so I've heard a lot of your guys' show today.
My goodness, you P1, Larry. Go ahead.
Yeah, seriously, I'm a specialist in Dibs and Willard.
Nice.
Or Willard and Dibs.
Thank you.
Top billing there. But, I think Shafsky kind of laid it out there perfectly. I mean, Trey yesterday looked good in the team portion, didn't look good in the the individual. Today looked great in the individual, and then got to the team portion and had a hard time completing a pass. But he looks pretty good. I mean, I think he looks good as far as his mechanics are better. He doesn't hold the ball at the hip and bring it up. And then when you have a big, elongated, loopy motion, it's just there's a lot that can, it's kind of like a Charles Barkley golf swing versus a streamlined swing. If you have a Barkley-type swing, you can't be a pro. Why? Because there's just too many ways for you to make mistakes. There's too many places in your swing for it to go awry. And that's kind of where Trey was. I think it's streamlined. His resting point, which is where he holds the ball before he goes to throw it, to his release point, is now far shorter than what we saw a year ago. And that bodes well for his completion percentage and just his ability to throw fewer picks and be more efficient. But that's just an aspect of quarterback. It's not like people acting like, oh, he's cleaned up the motion and now he's Mahomes. No. Sorry, that's not the way it works. But it's going to help, and I like him as a prospect, and I think that people just need to show patience. And the only thing I wish, guys, is I wish that the cap was not an issue here. The cap is a major component of this whole debate because you only have so much time and so much room. It's a hard cap, and his price goes up. And, I think if the Niners showed real patience with him and really just allowed him to evolve, from the number 2 quarterback spot over the next year and a half to 2 years, that I think they would have something potentially very special. But I just don't know that they're going to have that kind of time under the cap to give him the time that he needs to really kind of to make it happen. And they're not going to go with him as the starter because they're in a win now mode, and Brock's far more efficient. He's proven it. So it's one of those things where I wish they could rip up his deal, give him a deal that's a little bit more, team friendly, and see this thing through to completion. But unfortunately, I don't think that's one of the possibilities. Yeah. So he's either going to have to improve dramatically quick, in this year's preseason and really turn it around and show what he's got, or that they may run out of patience and I don't know that they can keep him for Dibs. You said it. They're Purdy and Lance are both not going to get second deals,
right? So
that's kind of the rub. We can debate what are the options from there, but I think that is very much a true statement.
Well, and that, Larry Krueger with us, is one of the reasons I'm still fascinated by this Brandon Allen thing, and maybe you can shed some light here. So I'm reading today what all the guys did at camp in terms of the number of passes and the number of completions. It appears to me that Brock Purdy got first-team reps, and the other 3 guys all got the same amount of reps, which is interesting to me. Why don't you put that in perspective? I'm trying to remember when Jimmy got re-signed or restructured and brought back last year. For a minute or two, right, the 49ers had 4 QBs in camp. Did Brock Purdy get as many looks as QB4 as Brandon is now?
I would say no, Mark. I would say no. My read on this is that you're giving him reps for a couple reasons. One, there's the injury factor, and you don't know who's going to get hurt or if any of them are going to get hurt. And so you got them all 4 of them on your roster. You got to prepare in the chance that they're going to have to be, on your team. So you're going to have to, you want to spread the reps around. You may have made a promise to all your quarterbacks. You had to attract Brandon Allen here in the first place. He was number 2 in Cincy. He's slated to be number 4 on paper right now. So you had to attract him somehow. So maybe that was a promise made. I don't know. I do agree with Shasky that there's a lot going on. It does seem like, give you an example. They skipped Darnold in the rotation the first time through. So he waited. He waited a good distance between reps in the middle of this practice. And as far as why are they doing that? Well, they're doing it because either they're going to have to play these guys because of an injury, or they're going to have to convince some other team in the league that they really like said player, and they're going to go with them, and that's the only way they're going to get anything decent in return via trade. So I think those are the 2 angles as why are you spreading out the reps to 4 guys? Well, there's a possibility of injury, there's a possibility of trade, and in both cases, all 4 quarterbacks need reps to increase their value.
Will we not have any real indication of where they're going until the first preseason game? And even at that point, Larry, are we not going to really find out exactly how the 49ers feel about their 3 other quarterbacks until cut-down day?
That is the ultimate question, Dibs, because you're right. It's they're telling us, it's there's the old saying, listen to what somebody does and not what somebody says. And that would be my advice to people trying to make sense of this, is follow what they do, not as much of what they say. Nobody's ever going to verbally downgrade an asset. There's just no real sense in it. But I think you can read it based on the reps. Dan, I really don't know the answer to that question. I would say probably after the second preseason game, we'll probably start to see some definitive movement that gives us an indication of their thinking, but not necessarily. This could be a game of chicken played all the way to the cut down.
Yeah.
Then you also got to remember this. The other major factor in the NFL is it seems like every week of NFL football that occurs, something major happens on the injury front, which changes the dynamic because there's only so many pieces on the chessboard around the league. And so a couple guys go down. What if Burrow's injury today was, season ending? And maybe, the general manager of the Bengals is on the horn with John Lynch saying, hey, you know what? Maybe we get Brandon Allen back for a 5th-round pick. So I think the Niners are going to be pretty cagey about it, but I really believe that at the end of the day, Brock's your 1, and I think there's a very good chance that Brandon Allen's your 3 and that Darnold and Lance are competing. And it sounds like they love Darnold, so it might just be about a trade of Trey, but I hate getting into that narrative because I predicted it going into the draft and it didn't happen, and I think, everybody's tired of hearing the trade narrative coming out of my mouth, and I'm kind of tired of talking about it.
Yeah, no, I totally get it, but I'm with you from this front. If you just forget about everything else, forget about our thoughts about anyone else, with what Kyle has said about Sam Darnold already this camp, it's hard for me to imagine him not at least being the 2.
Right.
I mean,
he didn't get a lot of reps today either, Mark, and it makes me wonder if Kyle believes that Sam lacks some motivation and maybe needs to have that carrot dangled all times in front of him. And maybe as they get to know him better, maybe they start to figure out what he's about. And maybe, I don't know why they iced him today or sat him for a period of time, but he didn't have a great practice yesterday, but is that why? Or is it about just balancing the reps? Kyle did make the point to us guys that he's going to balance out the reps, and it may not be day to day. It may be more like, every 2, they're going to go 3 on, 1 off. I think they're going to try to balance it. The reps may not balance like over the course of a 24-hour period.
Right.
It likely will over a 72-hour period. So I think if we're measuring things day by day, we probably should look at things more like in 3-day increments. One other thing that I think has to be mentioned today from today's practice, the Niners have hit again on an undrafted rookie running back. This kid, Kalen Laburn from Marshall, is the real deal, and he just had a phenomenal practice today. He had a couple runs that were super impressive. He's like kind of a sawed-off bowling ball-shaped running back. He's like 5'10", like 215 pounds, and he's just real. I mean, he really looked good today. Watch for him in the preseason. Laburn out of Marshall is really a tremendous young back.
Why would the 49ers ever draft another running back again?
He was undrafted.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
Just trade and undrafted guys. Don't ever pick anyone. The picked guys are the ones who don't work.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's an uncanny ability to find these guys. So you're right. I mean, anytime they're debating between a D lineman and a running back in the 3rd or 4th round, take the lineman.
Go lineman and call it a day. Exactly.
Yeah, draft the running back after the draft.
No joke. Larry, thanks, man. Great to have you always.
Hey, always great, guys. We'll do it again.
Yep. Great to have you as a P1 Larry, also. Yeah. That's Larry Krueger right here on Willard and Dibs, or Dibs and Willard. Your choice. Yeah. Dealer's choice. Yeah.